A mummy was never just a body wrapped in linen. In an elite Egyptian burial, the embalmers could open the body, remove several internal organs, dry them, treat them with oils and resins, wrap them in linen, place them under the protection of specific gods, and store them beside the dead. The brain could be removed and discarded. The heart was treated completely differently. And centuries later, the Egyptians sometimes stopped putting the organs in the famous jars at all, but kept the jars anyway. Those containers are what we now call canopic jars, and the story behind them is much stranger than 4 decorative pots with animal heads. The first problem the embalmers had to solve was decay. A dead body contains a lot of moisture, and the soft internal organs break down quickly. If the goal was to preserve the body for a very long time, moisture had to go. In many forms of Egyptian mummification, the abdomen was opened and major organs were removed so the body could be dried more effectively. The main drying material was natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts. It drew moisture out of tissue. The body could be packed and covered with natron, while the organs were also treated separately. The exact procedure changed across thousands of years, and not every Egyptian received the same treatment. But removal and desiccation of the viscera became an important part of high-status mummification, and the organs were not simply thrown away. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines could be dried, embalmed, and wrapped in linen. Then they were placed in 4 separate containers, usually kept together in a canopic chest in the tomb. In other words, the Egyptians separated the organs from the body to help preserve the corpse, but they still preserved the organs because they remained part of the deceased. Each of the 4 organs became linked with one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imseti, shown as a human, protected the liver. Hapi, with the head of a baboon, protected the lungs. Duamutef, with the head of a jackal, protected the stomach, and Kebes-Senuef, with the head of a falcon, protected the intestines. These 4 deities were themselves associated with protective goddesses: Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Selket. On surviving jars and chests, the inscriptions do more than identify an organ. They ask divine powers to protect what is inside. So the container was not just storage, it was part of a religious protection system built around the body. But the familiar animal-headed jars did not exist in exactly the same form throughout Egyptian history. Some of the earliest canopic equipment is much simpler. One of the most famous early examples is the calcite canopic chest associated with Queen Hetepheres I, mother of Khufu from the 4th dynasty. Its interior was divided into 4 compartments. This is important because it shows that the idea of preserving the viscera as a separate group was already present very early in the Pyramid Age. Old Kingdom canopic containers often had simple lids. Later, human-headed lids became common. The fully differentiated set, human, baboon, jackal, and falcon, developed later and became especially familiar in the New Kingdom and after. So if a movie shows the same 4 animal-headed jars beside every mummy from every century of Egyptian history, that is too simple. Tutankhamun gives us one of the most spectacular examples of how elaborate canopic equipment could become. In the treasury of his tomb, Howard Carter found the king's canopic equipment inside a gilded shrine. A calcite canopic box had 4 compartments, and inside were 4 miniature gold coffins made to contain the king's embalmed internal organs. The whole arrangement was protected by figures of goddesses. This was not a side detail of the burial. It was part of the carefully designed system intended to preserve and protect the king's body for eternity. Now there is one organ missing from the list: the heart. For the ancient Egyptians, the heart was far more than a pump. It was connected with intelligence, memory, character, and moral identity. In funerary belief, the heart could be judged in the afterlife. In the famous weighing of the heart, it was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, representing truth and order. That is why the heart was generally meant to remain with the deceased. Actual embalming practice was not perfectly uniform. In some cases, it may have been removed during treatment and then returned, but the heart was not assigned to one of the 4 canopic jars like the liver or lungs. Heart scarabs and other amulets could be placed on the mummy to protect this crucial organ and to help the deceased during judgment. We've already made a few episodes about heart scarabs in ancient Egypt. So subscribe, friends, because knowing art history makes you a more charismatic human. The brain had almost the opposite fate. In many mummies, especially from periods when elaborate artificial mummification was practiced, the brain was removed through the nasal region. Medical imaging and endoscopic studies of mummies have confirmed routes through the nose and the bones at the base of the skull. The brain was generally not preserved in a canopic jar. It could simply be discarded. That difference tells us something important. The Egyptians did not treat every organ according to modern ideas of biological importance. Their choices were shaped by both practical preservation and religious ideas about what parts of a person mattered in the next life. Even the 4 canopic organs were not always handled the same way. During the Third Intermediate Period, embalmers increasingly preserved and wrapped the organs and then returned them to the body cavity. The British Museum has mummies in which CT scans show packages placed back inside the abdomen. Small amulets of the 4 Sons of Horus could be attached to these organ packages. At that point, you might expect the canopic jars to disappear. They did not. Archaeologists have found what are called dummy canopic jars. Some are solid stone. Some have a cavity too small to hold an organ. Their lids may not even open. The organs had already been returned to the mummy, but the 4 jars still appeared in the burial because their ritual and protective meaning remained important. That is one of the best examples of how Egyptian funerary practice could change without abandoning an older symbol. The function changed, but the image survived. And modern science has shown that the contents of canopic equipment can preserve extraordinary information. Okay, friends. A British Museum canopic coffin from the 20th dynasty still contains embalmed lung tissue. Histological research identified the tissue as lung and even found evidence of conditions such as anthracosis, dark pigmentation often linked with inhaled smoke or particles. A funerary object that was created to protect an organ can now preserve medical evidence about a person who lived more than 3,000 years ago. So, another remarkable case is Sinetne, a high-status woman of the 18th dynasty who served as wet nurse to the future pharaoh Amenhotep II. Her organs were once stored in canopic jars found in tomb KV42 in the Valley of the Kings. The organs themselves are no longer there, but thin residues of the embalming substances survived inside 2 of the jars. Researchers analyzed those residues using modern chemical techniques. They identified mixtures including beeswax, plant oils, fats, bitumen, conifer resins, and other aromatic plant products. The mixtures used in the jar that had contained her lungs were not exactly identical to those in the jar associated with her liver. Researchers have suggested that different organs may sometimes have received different embalming mixtures, although they are careful to say that thousands of years of chemical degradation make that difficult to prove with certainty. The ingredients also reveal something larger than mummification. Some substances had to come from far outside Egypt. Preserving a body could depend on trade networks reaching across the Mediterranean and possibly much farther. A canopic jar can therefore tell us about religion, chemistry, medicine, status, and international trade at the same time. A separate study of a 26th dynasty embalming workshop at Saqqara made the picture even clearer. Researchers analyzed residues in vessels that still carried ancient labels and instructions for use. They identified complicated mixtures of fats, oils, waxes, tars, and resins used on different parts of the body and on the wrappings. The discovery showed that Egyptian embalming was not one fixed recipe handed down unchanged for thousands of years. It was a specialized craft with changing techniques and carefully prepared materials. There is also a strange detail hidden in the name Canopic Jar itself. The ancient Egyptians did not call these vessels canopic jars. The modern term comes from a later misunderstanding connected with Canopus, a figure known from Greek tradition, and with the Egyptian city the Greeks called Canopus. Early scholars connected human-headed vessels with that tradition and applied the word canopic to the organ containers. The name stuck, even though the original connection was mistaken. So the famous 4 jars tell a much bigger story than they seem to. They begin with a practical problem. A body decomposes. The embalmers removed moisture and treated vulnerable organs, but the solution immediately became religious as well. The organs were preserved, wrapped, protected by gods, and placed within a carefully organized burial system. The heart was kept for identity and judgment. The brain could be discarded. Over time, organs moved from jars back into the mummy, while empty stone jars continued to guard them symbolically. And thousands of years later, those same jars still contain traces of ancient resins, oils, human tissue, and even evidence of long-distance trade. In the episodes on our channel, Art.Timeline, you can hear many more strange and fascinating stories about mummies, burial rituals, and the world of the dead in ancient Egypt. We follow the evidence behind the objects, separate what we actually know from the myths, and explore the details that usually disappear from the short version of history. Subscribe to Art.Timeline and stay with us for more forgotten stories from the ancient world.